There is a fact in this video about a Massachusetts state chemist who spent 8 years faking drug test results by never once looking at the samples. And when she was caught, over 21,000 criminal convictions were thrown out in a single day. Here are 20 facts that prove Massachusetts is completely unhinged. In October 1989, a Boston man named Charles Stewart shot and killed his pregnant wife on their way home from a childbirth class, then called 911 and blamed a black carjacker. Police flooded Mission Hill, strip-searching black men in the street. They arrested Willie Bennett after his nephew made a joke taken as a confession. Stewart identified Bennett from a lineup where every other participant was a clean-cut Boston police officer. At least 33 people knew the truth before police did. When his own brother went to investigators, Stewart drove to a bridge and jumped. James Michael Curley was Boston's most beloved mayor and one of its most committed criminals. In 1904, convicted of fraud for impersonating a constituent on a civil service exam, he went to jail and won re-election from his cell. His slogan was, "He did it for a friend." Decades later, sentenced to federal prison for mail fraud while actively serving as mayor, he refused to resign and ran the city from Danbury, Connecticut. A quarter of Boston's population signed a petition for his release. President Truman personally freed him. Curley returned to City Hall like nothing happened. The FBI's top informant in Boston was simultaneously running organized crime in the city. Whitey Bulger fed the Bureau information on the Italian mob while his FBI handlers warned him about investigations, tipped him off to informants, and helped him avoid arrest. He murdered at least 11 people during this arrangement. When he finally ran, he stayed hidden for 16 years. Agents found him in 2011 in a Santa Monica apartment, with $800,000 in cash hidden inside the walls. The FBI agents who protected him were later convicted. In 1974, federal courts ordered Boston to desegregate its public schools. Boston, the city that launched the American Revolution, that put the Cradle of Liberty on its own seal, responded with riots. Buses carrying black children were stoned, families were attacked in the streets. The National Guard was deployed. Federal marshals escorted children to school for years. The birthplace of American freedom needed armed federal protection to get 10-year-olds into a classroom. Two men dressed as police officers rang the bell at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum at midnight on St. Patrick's Day, 1990. A guard let them in. They handcuffed both guards to pipes in the basement and spent 81 minutes stealing 13 works of art, now valued at over $500 million, the largest property crime in United States history. The FBI has said publicly it knows who did it. No arrests have ever been made. The museum's founder stipulated nothing inside could ever be moved, so the empty frames still hang on the walls today. Boston's Big Dig was budgeted at $2.6 billion. It finished at $14.6 billion. In 1999, ceiling bolts failed during testing. Managers declined to investigate and opened the tunnel anyway. The epoxy manufacturer had warned them in writing the adhesive wasn't rated for sustained overhead loads. In 2006, 26 tons of concrete ceiling panels fell and crushed a car, killing a passenger named Melina Del Valle. The contractor responsible avoided criminal charges and was not barred from future government contracts. A Massachusetts state senator was caught on FBI surveillance video stuffing a cash bribe into her bra. After her arrest, Diane Wilkerson announced she was continuing her write-in re-election campaign anyway and called the prosecutor's timing a political attack. She later pleaded guilty to 8 counts of attempted extortion. That is less surprising when you know this one. Massachusetts had 3 consecutive Speakers of the House convicted of felonies committed while in office: tax evasion, obstruction of justice, extortion, and conspiracy. 3 in a row. The 4th consecutive Speaker was named an unindicted co-conspirator in a separate corruption case. The most powerful legislative position in the state was, for 2 decades, more likely to end in federal prison than in retirement. Martha's Vineyard once had a rate of hereditary deafness so high it changed how the entire island communicated. For roughly 2 centuries, hearing residents signed as a matter of daily life, not courtesy, but necessity. Shopkeepers signed to customers. Farmers signed across fields. hearing islanders sign to each other even when no deaf person was present. The sign language that developed there was one of the primary sources that shaped what became American Sign Language. Paul Revere's engraving of the Boston Massacre is still printed in history textbooks today. It shows British soldiers lined up, firing in unison, on command, an organized execution of unarmed civilians. Eyewitness accounts describe a chaotic confrontation where the crowd had been throwing rocks and ice. The engraving was deliberate propaganda, and it worked. What most people don't know is that Revere didn't even draw it. He copied it from an artist named Henry Pelham, published it first, and put his own name on it. Pelham wrote him a furious letter calling it piracy. Revere ignored it. During the Salem witch trials, Giles Corey refused to enter a plea. Entering a plea would allow the court to seize his estate, leaving his family nothing. Under the law, refusing to plead meant being pinned to the ground with heavy stones piled on your chest until you either spoke or died. Giles Corey chose the stones. He was pressed over 2 days. He never entered a plea. His reported last words, as the weight increased, were "more weight." His estate passed to his heirs. The Salem witch trials ended in 1693. 20 people were executed. Massachusetts did not formally exonerate the last person hanged, Elizabeth Johnson, Jr., until 2022. That is 329 years between the execution and the apology. The exoneration happened because a group of 8th graders researched her case for a school project, got passionate about it, and lobbied their state senator to act. Middle schoolers closed a 329-year injustice. Here's the chemist from the start of this video. Annie Duking worked at a Massachusetts state drug lab for 8 years, testing 3 to 5 times more samples per month than any colleague. Her supervisors praised her productivity. Her coworkers could not remember seeing her near a microscope because she wasn't using one. She was eyeballing samples and inventing the results. When findings came back inconsistent, she tampered with the vials. Massachusetts threw out 21,587 drug convictions in a single day, the largest mass dismissal of criminal convictions in United States history. Albert DeSalvo confessed to being the Boston Strangler and killing 13 women. He described details never made public. Convicted, sentenced to life. In 2013, DNA from one of the crime scenes was tested, and it did not match DeSalvo. It matched an unknown male who has never been identified. The most famous serial killer case in Boston history may have involved multiple killers, and some of those murders may never be solved. Harvard University has a book in its library, confirmed by DNA testing in 2014 to be bound in human skin, not rumored, confirmed. The binding was identified through peptide mass fingerprinting. Harvard acknowledged the finding, noted that binding books in human skin was not unheard of in the 19th century, and removed it from their digitization program. On November 28, 1942, fire broke out at the Coconut Grove nightclub in Boston. Exits were blocked. The main revolving door jammed immediately. Within minutes, 492 people were dead. The aftermath directly produced 3 things the modern world takes for granted. The first, protocols for treating severe burn injuries, the fire code requiring outward swinging exit doors and lighted signs, and the clinical concept of grief counseling as a formal medical practice. One nightclub fire, one night, invented 3 modern fields. That is not the most unhinged disaster in Massachusetts history. On January 15, 1919, a storage tank holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses collapsed in Boston's North End. The wave was 25 feet high and moved at 35 miles per hour. It knocked a firehouse off its foundation, collapsed an elevated railway structure, and swept people and horses into the harbor. 21 people died. Locals claimed for decades you could still smell molasses rising from the streets on hot days. Jane Toppin worked as a private nurse across Massachusetts in the late 1800s. Doctors loved her, patients adored her. They called her Jolly Jane. She was poisoning them, experimenting with morphine and atropine cocktails, observing their reactions, then killing them. She confessed to 31 murders and told her lawyer the true number was likely over 100. Her stated goal was to kill more helpless people than any man or woman who ever lived. Found not guilty by reason of insanity, she was committed to Taunton Lunatic Asylum. Once inside, Jolly Jane refused to eat. She was convinced the staff was poisoning her food. The USS Constitution was launched in 1797. It fought in the War of 1812 and earned the nickname Old Ironsides after British cannonballs bounced off its hull. It is currently docked in Boston Harbor with a United States Navy crew on active duty. If you visited it today, you would be boarding a working military vessel built the same year John Adams became president, the oldest commissioned warship afloat in the world, still on duty. Fidelity Investments manages roughly $4.5 trillion in customer assets, more than the gross domestic product of Japan. Headquartered in Boston, controlled by a single family, the Johnsons, since its founding. Never taken public, no public shareholders, no public board with real authority, no mandatory disclosures beyond the legal minimum. One private Boston family controls more wealth than most nations produce in a year and answers to essentially no one. 20 facts, 1 state. A mayor who ran a city from a federal prison cell, a chemist who destroyed 21,000 lives by staring at samples and making things up, and a nurse who spent her final decades refusing to eat because she knew better than anyone what poison could do. Next up, South Dakota is unhinged. The state where there is a sealed, inaccessible room blasted directly into the rock behind Abraham Lincoln's head at Mount Rushmore, and the reason it was built there makes even less sense than that sounds.